What if I told you that a country that was supposed to be crushed in 72 hours, is now teaching the world's most powerful military alliance how to fight? What if I told you that just 10 soldiers from Ukraine walked into a NATO war game, and wiped out 2 entire battalions in a single afternoon? What if I told you that Russia, with its tanks, its missiles, its 600,000-man army, is now advancing 29% slower than it was just 1 year ago? This is not fiction. This is not propaganda. This is happening right now, in 2026, and today, we are going to break down the one brilliant move that is changing everything. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, today's video is something special. We're going to go deep into Ukraine's military revolution, the strategy, the technology, the mindset, and explain why military experts, NATO generals, and defense analysts around the world are completely rethinking warfare because of what Ukraine has done. Stay with me until the end, because the final reveal, what Ukraine just did on the Donetsk frontline, is going to absolutely blow your mind. Let's go. To understand why Ukraine's move is so brilliant, we first need to understand the situation on the ground in early 2026. Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. At that time, the Kremlin believed the war would be over in days. The plan was simple: overwhelm Ukraine with sheer numbers, decapitate its government, and install a friendly regime in Kiev. That didn't happen. 4 years later, the war is still raging. And what has emerged from this conflict is something nobody predicted. Ukraine has become the world's most battle-hardened and technologically innovative military force on the planet. Now, let's look at the front lines in 2026. Russia has made gains. Cities like Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad in Donetsk Oblast fell to Russian forces in early 2026 after months of brutal urban warfare. Russia has been pushing hard along the Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka directions. These are key logistics corridors that, if fully controlled, would give Russia a pathway deeper into Ukrainian-held Donetsk. But here is where it gets interesting. Despite capturing those cities, Russia cannot capitalize on those gains. According to the Institute for the Study of War, one of the most respected conflict analysis organizations in the world, Russian forces have been unable to make significant advances west of Pokrovsk since December 2025. And here's the number that tells the whole story. Russia is advancing 29% slower in early 2026 than in the same period of 2025. The Kremlin is demanding Ukraine hand over all of Donetsk Oblast. But at the current pace, military analysts say that demand has no basis in battlefield reality. It is, in the words of experts, a cognitive warfare tool, propaganda, not strategy. So what is stopping Russia? The answer is Ukraine's brilliant move. If you want to understand modern warfare in 2026, you need to understand drones. Not the little toy drones you can buy at a store. We're talking about military-grade unmanned aerial systems, FPV drones, bomber drones, surveillance drones, and a new class of weapon that Ukraine has pioneered, mid-range strike drones. Ukraine didn't stumble into drone warfare. It was forced into it. In 2022, Ukraine faced a terrible reality. Russia had a massive air force. Ukraine didn't. Russia had overwhelming missile stockpiles. Ukraine didn't. Russia had more tanks, more artillery, more soldiers. So Ukraine did something extraordinary. It looked at its situation and said, "We cannot fight the way Russia fights. We need a completely different approach." And that different approach became the most important military innovation of the 21st century. Here's how Ukraine's drone strategy works. The first layer is tactical drones, operating within 20 kilometers of the front line. These are FPV drones, first-person view, that are essentially flying grenades. They're cheap, fast, and deadly. Ukrainian operators use them to take out Russian infantry, armored vehicles, and supply lines in real time. The second layer is deep strike drones, operating over 300 kilometers away. These are the drones that have been attacking Russian oil refineries, military depots, and infrastructure deep inside Russian territory. Ukraine has even struck targets near Moscow. These attacks are strategically devastating. They force Russia to defend a massive rear area, stretching its resources thin. But the third layer, and this is the brilliant move, is what experts are calling the mid-range strike campaign. According to analysis by the Atlantic Council, since early 2025, Ukraine has been systematically targeting everything between 20 and 300 kilometers from the front line. This is the zone that contains Russia's logistics backbone, the military warehouses, the command centers, the transport hubs, the air defense systems, the fuel depots. Ukraine conducted at least 365 mid-range drone strikes in a single year. That is one strike every single day, for 12 months straight. And nearly half of those strikes were aimed at Russia's air defense systems. Think about what that means. If you destroy Russia's air defenses in the rear area, you open the door for even more devastating attacks further back. It's like peeling an onion, layer by layer. Ukraine is stripping away Russia's ability to defend itself. This is not improvised. This is not desperate. This is strategic genius. Now we come to perhaps the most jaw-dropping story of this entire conflict, and it didn't even happen in Ukraine. It happened in Estonia. In May 2025, NATO held its annual large-scale military exercise called Hedgehog 2025. Over 16,000 troops from 12 NATO countries participated. British brigades, Estonian divisions, American units, European forces, the cream of the Western military alliance, training together to prepare for modern warfare. And then Ukraine was invited to send a small team. Just 10 people. 10 Ukrainian drone operators. Their job? Play the role of the enemy force. What happened next sent shockwaves through every military headquarters in Europe and America. In half a day, those 10 Ukrainians simulated the destruction of 17 armored vehicles and conducted 30 additional strikes on other targets. By the end of the exercise, they had effectively wiped out 2 NATO battalions. The response from NATO commanders was described in one word: shock. One Estonian military official said the results were terrible for NATO forces. American troops reportedly couldn't detect where the Ukrainian drone operators were positioned at any point during the exercise. So how did 10 people defeat 16,000? The Ukrainian units later published a detailed account. They explained exactly what they did. First, they used aerial reconnaissance with the vector drone system to identify where NATO formations were moving. The NATO forces, even though they knew they were in an exercise, moved their armored vehicles in large columns without camouflage. They set up tents in the open. They didn't check their routes for drones before advancing. Second, the Ukrainian team used the Delta system to coordinate simultaneous, mass drone strikes, hitting multiple targets at once, creating chaos and cognitive overload across the NATO command structure. Third, and this is the key insight, they were faster. Their kill chain was so short that by the time NATO commanders could identify a threat and respond, the strike had already happened. One NATO officer put it bluntly: they have a much greater tactical imagination than we do. The British Army has now begun studying Ukrainian battlefield experience and completely revising its approach to warfare. Before 2022, British forces were trained to prioritize tactically safe operations, stick to doctrine, minimize risk. That mindset is now being abandoned, because Ukraine has proven it doesn't work against drone-saturated warfare. Now let's come back to Ukraine itself, and the move that triggered today's title. In early 2026, Russia launched what analysts described as its largest assault of the year on the Donetsk fortress belt, a line of fortifications that Ukraine has held since 2014. This was a massive, coordinated Russian push. Wave after wave of infantry, armored vehicles, artillery, drone swarms. Russia threw everything at this defensive line. And Ukraine crushed it. How? Ukrainian troops, many of them recently trained under NATO instructors in the United Kingdom, executed what military observers called a brilliant ambush plan. Rather than simply reacting to Russian advances, Ukrainian commanders had already anticipated where Russian forces would move, when they would be most vulnerable, and exactly how to channel them into kill zones. The tactical creativity on display shocked even their British trainers. At the same time, in the skies above, Russia lost 2 military aircraft in a single day. An An-26 military transport aircraft, a large cargo plane, was shot down, killing all 29 soldiers aboard. A Su-34 fighter bomber was also reportedly destroyed, one of Russia's most advanced strike aircraft. Losing 2 aircraft in one day, combined with the failed ground assault, was a devastating blow, not just militarily, but psychologically. And the numbers back this up. ISW confirmed that Russian territorial gains slowed dramatically. The Kremlin's public demands, that Ukraine surrender all of Donetsk within 2 months, were exposed as empty threats. At current rates of advance, Russia cannot achieve those goals. The ultimatum was, in the words of analysts, cognitive warfare, an attempt to pressure Ukraine and its allies into accepting a ceasefire on Russia's terms. Ukraine didn't blink. Let's zoom out and talk about why all of this matters, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world. What Ukraine has done is demonstrate something that defense experts have been debating for decades: does technology fundamentally change warfare? The answer, based on everything we've seen, is yes, but not in the way people expected. Drones didn't replace soldiers. They didn't make tanks obsolete overnight. What they did was compress time. They created a battlefield where whoever acts faster wins. Ukraine understood this before anyone else. And now the entire Western military establishment is playing catch-up. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, one of the world's most prestigious think tanks, published a major study in April 2026 calling Ukraine's innovation model a new revolution in military affairs. They noted that Ukraine's approach is distributed and bottom-up, hundreds of small companies, volunteer groups, and frontline units all innovating simultaneously, feeding discoveries directly back to the battlefield. This is the opposite of how traditional militaries work. In the US or UK, a new military system might take 10 to 15 years to go from concept to deployment. In Ukraine, that timeline has been compressed to months. One specific example, Ukraine's mid-range strike drones, the ones attacking Russian logistics in the 20 to 300 kilometers zone, were developed, tested, and deployed during active wartime, in response to frontline feedback, in less than a year. That is unprecedented in military history. Now, to be fair and balanced, let's talk about Russia. Russia is not losing in the traditional sense. It still holds significant Ukrainian territory. It is still launching massive attacks. Just days ago, Russia fired nearly 650 drones at Ukrainian regions bordering Poland and Hungary in a single night. It killed civilians. It damaged infrastructure. It is still causing immense suffering. But strategically, Russia has serious problems. First, manpower. Russia is now ordering companies to nominate their own employees for military service, 2 to 5 names per company, depending on size. Enlistment rates are falling in major cities. Despite financial incentives, the army is struggling to replace its losses. Second, logistics. Ukraine's mid-range drone campaign is working. Russian fuel supplies, ammunition depots, and command posts are being struck daily. The SBU and Ukraine's drone forces recently destroyed Russian fuel trains near Luhansk, directly cutting supplies to frontline troops. Without fuel, tanks don't move. Without ammunition, artillery goes silent. Third, air power. Russia has lost significant portions of its air force and strategic aviation capabilities. Ukraine has already degraded over 30% of Russia's strategic aviation. Every Su-34 lost is a loss that Russia cannot easily replace. Russia is not broken. But it is bleeding. And the rate of bleeding is accelerating. So where does this go from here? The honest answer is, nobody knows. War is unpredictable. Ceasefire negotiations are ongoing in 2026. There is enormous international pressure, from the United States, from Europe, from various mediators, to find a diplomatic solution. But what we can say with confidence is this. Ukraine has already won in one crucial sense. It has survived. A country that was given 72 hours has now fought for over 4 years. It has not just survived, it has transformed itself into one of the most innovative military forces in modern history. NATO is now learning from Ukraine, not the other way around. The British Army is changing its doctrine. The Estonian military is rethinking everything. American defense planners are taking notes. And on the battlefield, Ukraine's drone forces are not slowing down. The drone line, a continuous network of drone surveillance and strike capability along the entire contact line, is being strengthened every single week. Russia's window for easy gains is closing. Let me leave you with one image. 10 Ukrainian soldiers. A tent. Some laptops. And drone controllers. Versus 16,000 NATO troops with tanks, helicopters, artillery, and decades of training. The 10 Ukrainians won. Not because they had more resources. Not because they had better equipment. But because they had experience, imagination, and a system built for the speed of modern war. That is Ukraine's brilliant move. Not one single tactic. Not one single weapon. But a philosophy of war, faster, smarter, more creative, more adaptive, forged in the most brutal classroom on earth. Russia wanted to erase Ukraine from the map. Instead, Ukraine is rewriting the rules of warfare. And the world is watching. If you found this video valuable, please share it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And drop a comment below. What do you think is the most important lesson the world should learn from Ukraine's military innovation? Thank you for watching. Stay informed. Stay sharp.